we all ready? TV, Bobby, Amanda? Okay.
Meeting staff is ready. Council Chair.
Bobby, did you say yes? It's
We're ready on our end, Board Chair.
okay. Great. All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's Redevelopment Agency Board meeting. It's May 4th. So some of you know what's going on. Today, we're happy to have you here while we continue to hold our meeting remotely due to the declarations of emergency related to the pandemic and the earthquake that we had last year. Even though there is an allocation to attend meetings in person, this is still considered an open and public meeting. Please keep joining us remotely until the day it's safe to gather again. We also welcome members of the public who may be watching our usual video feeds on the City Council's agenda page, YouTube, SLC TV, or Facebook Live. We are glad to have you here with us and hope that you're staying safe. Our first items of our agenda is item A, which is comments. And we start our RDA meetings with comments to the board. As a reminder, written comments can be submitted to the RDA offices at PO Box 145455, Salt Lake City, Utah 84114-5455. Your comment about any RDA business, or if you have any feedback to give us regarding today's meeting setup, please contact us. We're accepting your comments through WebEx, and for those whose only option is to call in, staff will be monitoring a separate telephone line. The board has always had rules of decorum that are created to advance the legitimate government objectives of having an orderly, efficient meeting that moves through the agenda and gives everyone the opportunity to voice their opinions. In person, we have added the benefit of being able to see each other, which helps us get to know our constituents and engage more meaningfully. We still want to provide a space for people to feel comfortable and safe to participate. In order to achieve this, our rules of decorum extend from the moment you arrive into our virtual meeting. To help facilitate our comment period, please be respectful, avoid yelling or making racial slurs, obscene or defamatory remarks. The board respects all points of view and we welcome new insights. However, using foul language and personal attacks make the public comment forum uncivil and intimidating for others. This meeting is also being broadcast on television and the internet, and so we will more strictly enforce the use of profanity. If someone uses profanity, we will mute your microphone and you will forfeit your opportunity to address the board today. If you feel you need to use profanity to express your point, you're welcome to email board members or call our comment line at 801-535-7654. In addition, just as we would ask for your name in our in-person meetings, we have requested your name during the registration process. To limit disruption, your name cannot include a message or violate our rules of decorum. If your registered name doesn't meet this requirement, then our staff will use the chat feature to gather that information from you. Robert Nutzman from our staff is helping to moderate the meeting and will be messaging with the attendees to coordinate. Please monitor the chat screen for information and or feel free to message our staff with any questions. Amanda Lau will be calling the names of those who wish to comment and unmuting lines. When Amanda unmutes your line and lets you know it's your turn, please state your first and last name just as you would in our in-person meetings. Indicate the topic you're speaking on and the 2-minute timer will begin. At the 2-minute mark, we will announce time and your microphone will be muted. We will now open our general comment period. Amanda, please start with our first comment.
Thank you, RDA board. Today, I see we only have one commenter. We have George Chapman on the line. George, go ahead, you're unmuted.
Oh, Okay, George Chapman. Salt Lake City RDA should not be looking for excuses to expand or reconfigure tracks for hundreds of millions of dollars in the ballpark 400 West area. UTA just gave a report on it. Salt Lake City's RDA should publicize it. But why not a park? Why not a park library? Why not unrepurpose the $5 million in impact fees that you decided not to use for a park in the area? You're willing to spend $20 million on a soccer complex in the middle of nowhere that requires car use, but you're not willing to spend $20 million on a park people can walk to? Why not ask the residents and businesses what they want? You want to encourage an innovation center. A big park is the best way. And by the way, the 400 West Spur needs to be protected from the new apartment that Salt Lake City is about to approve. The ballpark area deserves more affordable housing. This is, again, general comments. It deserves mixed income, not like the 228 West, 13 South loan proposal you're considering for 106 out of 140 units affordable. More than 25% ends up like Palmer Court. The area needs a wide sidewalk, and that should be part of the project so that bicycles and pedestrians can safely and comfortably use the sidewalk. Excuse me. It's a bad project in a poor location that will destroy comfortable access to tracks. Again, that area needs a 10-foot wide sidewalk to comfortably access tracks. Please reevaluate the project and the loan proposal. Those are my comments. Thanks for listening.
Alrighty, board chair, just double checking. There are no more commenters for general comment.
Great, thank you to everybody, to George for providing general comment. We have no public hearings today, and so we're moving on to item C1. And C1, hold on, are the board? So the board will consider a motion to ratify the determination that the board will continue to meet remotely and without an anchor location under HB 5002.
Madam Chair, I move that the board continue meeting remotely. Is that enough?
Second it.
Right. So we have a motion by Board Member Mano and a second by Board Member Dugan. I'm going to roll call this. Board Member Rogers?
Yes.
Is Board Member Wharton here yet?
Yes, and I vote yes.
Okay. Board Member Mano?
Yes.
Fowler?
Yes.
Dugan?
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So that passes unanimously. We're moving on to item number 2. This is a resolution. It's loaned to Colony B LLC for affordable housing development at approximately 228 West, 1300 South. We will receive a briefing today. And at the table, we have Allison Rowland from our staff, Tammy Hunsaker, and Lauren Parisi from RDA. And also the thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. This is Allison. As you mentioned, the idea with this briefing is to discuss and consider approving a $1.34 million loan to Colony B LLC for a mixed income affordable housing project. You mentioned the project is located at about 228 West and 1300 South, and it would be about a $21 million total development. It'd be 140 residential units, of which 106 would be deed restricted as affordable for 50 years. And the units would be a mix of studios and one-bedroom apartments. The rents for the affordable units, which as I mentioned were those 106, would be between 25% AMI and 50% AMI. 15 of the units will accommodate people with long-term mobility challenges, and another 11 units would initially be available for people who are aging out of foster care. This is something that the developers intend to continue to the extent possible with future renters. The Developer Colony B LLC is a joint venture between the Neighborhood Nonprofit Housing Corporation, which is based in Logan, I believe, and Defy Collabs, which is based in Bountiful. The loan itself, this $1.3 million loan, is intended to cover a funding gap created by increased construction costs, which have risen about $1 million by the estimate of the developers. They also reflect a drop in the value of the LIHTC credits that were awarded to the development last September. With this loan, there's also a proposed interest rate reduction. The RDA staff recommends that this interest rate reduction be approved by the board, and it's permitted by program policy on a case-by-case basis. The reason they're asking for this special approval is because the proximity to the ballpark station tracks line would allow for a reduction of 0.25%. And that would take the standard housing development loan program rate to 2.75%. The developers are asking that that rate be further reduced to 1.2% because of the senior lenders required debt coverage. The debt coverage ratio is 1.15% according to the senior lenders requirements, and the housing development loan program's minimum is 1.1, so it fits within the housing development loan program's parameters. The city would be in second position for repayment. The project would break ground in July 2021, and occupancy and lease up would be beginning in late 2022 and early 2023. Finally, the Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board unanimously recommended approval of this loan, and you could take action potentially on May 18th, 2021, which will be your next RDA meeting. So without anything more, I think Tammy can go ahead.
Thank you, Allison. I will actually turn it over to Lauren Parisi to go through a presentation on the project. But before we do that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Katie Lewis, who is here to introduce a new attorney with the attorney's office who will actually be helping the RDA out with our loans moving forward. Katie?
Hello, RDA board, and thank you, Tammy and Lauren, for allowing me to take just a moment to introduce Sarah Montoya, who she just turned her screen on. I see her down there. She joined our office, gosh, a couple weeks ago, maybe a month ago, and I thought I would just give you a quick bio and let you know how excited we are for Sarah to join our team. Sarah was previously a vice president and senior counsel at Select Portfolio Servicing, which was a very large mortgage servicer, and she spent nearly 8 years engaged in transactional work and litigation management for them. She's got experience with securities, real estate, consumer finance, and lien enforcements and foreclosures. And she was born in rural New Mexico, attended UC Berkeley, and earned a bachelor's degree in cognitive science. She served as a ski instructor before attending the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law. And she has 2 small kids, lives in Cottonwood Heights, and spends time being active and outdoors. So we are absolutely thrilled to have Sarah join our team. She's going to be taking over all of the loans, both for the city and the RDA, and we're really looking forward to her expertise. And I wanted to be sure that you could put a face to a name when you see her on meeting invites or emails that how thrilled we are to have her on our team. So Sarah, I'm not expecting you to say anything, but I wanted to be sure to welcome you to the team.
Thanks, Katie. Thanks for that great introduction. Hi, everybody.
Welcome,
Madam
Sarah.
Chair.
We're excited to have you. That's awesome. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I just say something?
Go ahead.
Hi, Sarah. It's so good to see you. Welcome to Salt Lake City. I've known Sarah for a little bit, even back in law school. So this is really exciting. Welcome to the team. It'll be good to see your face.
Hey,
I mean, the only thing is that you don't live in Salt Lake City, but we'll forgive you.
We're working on that. Just kidding. a bad market to move, but otherwise.
Well, welcome. This is very exciting. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Right, Lauren, you're on, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I do have a brief presentation. I think Allison covered a lot of good information, but I can dive into a few more details. Thank you, Bobby. If we can flip to the next slide. So again, this is a $1.34 million loan request from Colony B LLC from the Salt Lake City's Housing Development Trust Fund to accommodate a new apartment building to be located at 228 West, 1300 South. The site is highlighted in red on the map here, and it's just east of 3rd West across from the Lowe's and directly adjacent to the 1300 South track stop there. So the applicants do have extensive experience with affordable housing development in Utah, and the Neighborhood Housing Solutions also offer multiple housing programs to facilitate home ownership in the community. So that's a little bit about the applicant. And next slide, please. So again, as Allison mentioned, Colony B will have 140 studio and 1-bedroom units, and 106 of those will be affordable to households earning between 25% and 50% of the area median income. And the unit type and exact AMI has been broken down here, but the majority of the units will be deeply affordable studios at 45% AMI. So as a reference, rent for studios at 45% AMI will be approximately $659 a month. And then rent for 1-bedrooms at 45% AMI will be approximately $709 a month. And that's based on HUD's 2020 income data. As Allison also mentioned, 15 of the units will be built as type A to accommodate individuals with long-term mobility issues. And the applicants also have a relationship with Volunteers of America's Youth Center and will work to place 15 individuals aging out of foster care into the building. And so on the screen here is the site plan, and it will run the length of the property fronting 13th South. Next slide, please. So here are a few more renderings of the project. The top right is the front facade off 13th South. This is a 5-story building that will include a gym, bicycle storage, and community lounges for residents. Next slide. And here's another view of the front facade off 13th. And then there will be parking to the rear. Next slide, please. The total project cost is approximately $21 million. The project has secured 9% low-income housing tax credits and have an equity investor that will purchase the credits for $9.59 million. The project will also apply for state LIHTC and have an equity investor to purchase the credits for $702,000. They have secured traditional financing from Rocky Mountain CRC for $8.2 million and an Olene Walker loan for $1 million. They'll also receive energy rebates, leaving a gap of approximately $1.34 million that they are requesting from the Housing Development Trust Fund at this time. Next slide. So the project is projected to generate a positive cash flow for the entire 16-year investor period and will maintain a debt service coverage ratio of at least 1.15. And this meets the Housing Development Trust Fund's DCR requirement of 1.1. I also wanted to note that the Housing Development Trust Fund policy prioritizes projects that can break ground within 3 months. And construction for Colony B is projected to start in July, so it hits that priority for the program. Next slide, please. So I'll go through the terms quickly here. Again, it's a $1.34 million loan request. The project qualifies for a 0.25% interest rate reduction from the standard 3% rate due to its proximity to transit, but the applicants are requesting an additional 1.55 reduction to get to 1.2%. Sorry, there's a typo there. That should be 1.55. And they need this in order to maintain a debt coverage ratio of 1.15, which is required by their senior lender. So the Housing Trust Fund policy does state that exceptions to standard loan terms may be recommended on a case-by-case basis based on the requirements of senior lenders, but the interest is not to go below 1%. So RDA staff does recommend approval of this reduced interest rate as the project has a high number of deeply affordable units. It's ready to break ground this summer. They have secured 9% low-income housing tax credits, and the applicant is a housing nonprofit that will make hard repayments to the RDA with a balloon payment at the end of the 16-year loan term. Next slide, please. So the project does align with multiple policies within the city's housing plan, as you can see listed here. The Housing Trust Fund Advisory Board, who gave the project a positive recommendation, commended the high number of deeply affordable units in a single project. And this project also makes the most of its location right next to the 1300 South track stop. So that's all the information I have for you. I know the applicants are also in attendance if you have questions for myself or them.
Lauren, members, it's open to you if you have questions for Lauren, or we can let the applicant address us if you like, and then we can ask questions for everybody. So questions now? Okay, Dan, go ahead.
Just confirmation or clarification. There's 106 affordable, the 11 for the aging out of foster care. Is that included in the 106 or is that in addition to it? And then the other ones for the mobility, are those included or in addition?
Those are both included in the affordable unit count.
Okay. Okay. I didn't have any other further questions. Just curious.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple of questions, Madam Chair. Thanks. So I have the Housing Development Loan Fund, that's the right one, right? Can you tell me what the balance of that is right now and how much of that this would take out of that pot?
Yeah, so this is coming from the balance of the fund that was allocated in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. And so the balance is 1.34 million, which this will use.
So there would be.
Well, to clarify, this is Tammy. The FY20 allocation, it was provided with legislative intent that the RDA administer those funds on policies that HAND had been administering. So we kept those funds available on a first come, first served basis for emergency gap financing. There have been allocations in previous or in more recent fiscal years that have been going out through notice of funding availability, more through a competitive process. And there's actually around 4.5 million available to go out through a competitive process. And we will actually get into those numbers in the next agenda item.
Oh, okay. But this is the remainder of that, what you said was for emergency gap financing, and this would basically use the rest of that amount.
Correct.
Okay, thanks. I mean, the mix, the number of affordable units is obviously really necessary and needed. So I'm really happy for those to come online. And I love that there's programs that are targeting specific underserved communities. I think that's great. I worry about the lack of ground floor commercial space on this part of the of 13th South. On this part of the of 13th South. One, I worry that it's not a great, the ground floor right adjacent to the sidewalk of 13th South, right by the track station, doesn't really feel like a great place to live, with people walking by right along that sidewalk. And B, I just think ground floor commercial would do a ton to help revitalize this part of the neighborhood. And I know we're talking about that station area plan and all of those goals. So I worry about that. And then also worry about the lack of family-sized housing within projects. And so understanding that this is emergency gap financing, so we weren't brought to the table till very late in the project process. I assume those things are impossible to be fixed at this point, but maybe not. Either way, I guess I'm inclined to support the project, but also just raise my concerns that I think there are a few things. I love when I can agree with George Chapman. I think there are a few things that are concerning about the design of the project. So I'm not sure what other board members think, but those are some of my thoughts.
Go ahead. Thanks, board member. Go ahead, Amy.
I just want to say that I have not yet in 4 years of being on the council had anyone bring to the table the idea of reserving space for that population that is aging out of foster care. It is unbelievable how many people we actually have in that like 1821 to 25-26 area that are experiencing homelessness because they can't get resources. And I commend you and want to thank you for thinking about that very vulnerable population. And I think that, like I said, it's the first project in 4 years that I've been on the council to have somebody actually dedicate something to that population. My question is, and I heard this in the presentation, that you hope to continue dedicating that. I know that there's a rent restriction for 50 years and there's only so much legally, and I'm looking at Allison to tell me legally what we can and can't do here, but Allison Parks, but is there a way, so we have a rent restriction for 50 years with the 50% AMI. Is there a way to kind of continue that dedication for that population? Do we know? And maybe I can ask Jake. Yeah, I believe you're the representative for the developers here, and welcome.
Yes, first and foremost, forgive me. I've been working a basement by myself for so long. I forgot that I needed to be dressed more formally, so I have a hat on today. So I apologize for that. I've been in the basement by myself. So,
Jake, if I could have a onesie on, I would. So it's totally okay.
Perfect. So the way it works, the way it was worded in the presentation, it's required of us to, when those units become back available. So from the get-go, we have to market to that population first for a certain amount of time. I think it's 90 days. We have to market to that population. And then if we can't find a qualifying tenant at that point, we can rent it to someone else. But our goal would be, obviously, in those 90 days, we would like to continue that. The VOA being, because their youth resource center is just one stop away, we love the idea of partnering with them and the work that they do. So we'll be working closely with them to hopefully keep a list of folks who need a spot so we can keep those full. So it's our hope that we do continue that, barring we just can't find anybody that qualifies, if that makes sense. So hopefully that answers your question. And as far as some of the other things that come up with the design, I tend to agree, but as far as the way this land worked out, we wanted to get as many units as we could fit because we're right on the track stop there. But there is some, in the site plan, there's some landscaping and things to hopefully buffer those ground floor units, but also to put some eyes on the street to a certain extent to hopefully keep that both with landscaping and lighting to keep it a place that becomes inviting to walk by. But we tried to take those things into account. We were in our mind, even though we maybe didn't come up with a perfect solution. But it was something that enabled us, by putting that many units, it enables us to get actually more affordable units. So normally a 9% tax credit project caps out at about 100 units, and we're at 140, and only 106 of those are restricted. But the other, because of the design of the project and the population we're targeting, we were able to get more units that still fall below 70. Every single one of our units, even the market rate ones, are below 70% AMI, and even the majority of those fall closer to like 60% AMI. So we feel like it's a really good complement to some of the stuff that even CW Urban built. This is phase 3. We purchased it from CW Urban. They built some market rate for sale townhomes that sold for like $400,000 just behind us. So we feel like it brings a really creative mix of populations that hopefully will work together to help this node of the community continue to grow. But that was a long-winded answer, and I also wanted to answer some of the other concerns, but hopefully that gets you what you needed, Amy.
Thank you, Jake. And I think, thank you Board Member Rogers, see your hand, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Amy said. You know, when we were citing the homeless resource centers, we know that there were 9 subsects that we were trying to actually identify, and we've built for 3. We're missing 6. And this helps, you know, facilitate one of those missing links. So, you know, to have a public-private partnership that we're doing with this, it to me is a win-win scenario for that population that we are missing. So, and I like to hear that, Jake, that you guys want to partner with the VOA, specifically One Stop Away. I love this. It's an opportunity for us to participate and not fully participate and let the private sector take over. So, dude, kudos to you. And you don't need to worry about your hat, because I've got my t-shirt on that says "Too legit to quit." So we're good.
This is Kimberly Chitris. Do you mind if I chime in from the legal perspective on Amy's question?
Go ahead.
You know, right now our restrictions under our loan agreements run for 50 years. That is consistent and maybe even longer with what the state requires. And it's probably what you're going to find as market value, or is sort of the market terms for restricted units when we're restricting a housing type. I will say there's probably some opportunities as this project matures where they might need additional funding, or there might be additional incentives the city can offer through programs, you know, as the program matures, as it gets closer to maturing and maybe is looking at changing its purpose, where we could incentivize keeping that use and you know, really trying to target those vulnerable populations. I think right now 50 years is a pretty long time. And we could consider some loan policies going forward, though, that might help us as these projects continue, that might help us to really incentivize housing vulnerable populations.
Madam Chair, may I follow up with Kimberly on a question?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So I appreciate that. And I do think 50 years is a good amount of time, and recognize that that's sort of standard. I guess my thing is, with the rent restriction only includes exactly that, the rent restriction, that it's at a 50% AMI or a 60% AMI or whatever the terms that have been negotiated come to, right? Is that we can't, I guess, to your point, we can incentivize that units continue being used for a certain use or a certain population, but can't really rent restrict it and then say, and it can only be used for, or can we?
Madam Chair.
Does that make sense, Tammy? Can you read my mind?
Yeah. If I can jump in, and Jake, I believe, can clarify this, but I'm assuming the approval for the 9% tax credits through the Utah Housing Corporation, that includes what we call a LURA, a land use restriction agreement. And all of these details will be laid out in the LURA, including restricting units for special populations. And it sounds like the negotiation that the developer's done with Utah Housing Corporation includes that 90-day provision that if they can't find the applicable population within 90 days, they can open it up to other populations. So maybe Jake can clarify that, but we also implement a restrictive use agreement that has the rent and the income restrictions, and we can piggyback on what the LURA says just for double protection. So I believe we could, Kimberly can clarify, but I believe we could add the same language that the LURA has about the special populations. Am I on the right track, Jake?
Yeah, so it is required, and it's a part of the tax credit requirements from UHC and the LORA. So that will still be on there. And so as a part of us staying in compliance, we have to show that we made sufficient marketing efforts to do that. I don't know, I know there's a fair housing issue in saying you can only rent to a certain population. So I don't know how that works with the LORA. All I can say is I know we are required to have that outreach take place before we can rent it to someone else. So as a part of the pre-qualification process, that is a requirement that we have. That goes with the 50 years in the LORA or whatever it is.
And I believe that's right with fair housing. The language has to be more about marketing to specific populations, so you're not discriminating against other populations.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And Jake, I do like this project too. Echo Amy and James. I think this is one of those that we'll probably use as an example for our next discussion and our next item about what our priorities should be for funding projects like yours, or when people come to ask us for money. I do, having that said, I do agree with board member Manu about the street activation, right? We're also looking into street activation through commercial uses, but you explained that you're trying to get more units into the project, so it's that balance. It's hard sometimes for us to pinpoint exactly what we need or what the priorities are. So thank you. I don't have any questions or other comments. We will talk about this later. Oh, go ahead, board member Wharton.
Just that what Amy and James were saying, I would love to see if we can do more projects like this where we're reaching out to groups like youth that are in danger of homelessness as they're coming out of the foster care system. And I also like that this is like mixed, that it's mixing that with other groups that are potentially or that are traditionally underserved. So I just wanted to, I'd love to see more of that. Thank you.
Go ahead, board member Fowler.
Thank you. Chairwoman, would it be okay if we heard a little bit from the developer? I know we sort of bombarded him with some questions, and I apologize, but I got a little aggressive, mostly just because I'm so excited about this. Like I love
yeah,
that you're thinking about a population that isn't a couple of populations that aren't generally thought about. So would it be okay if we gave the developer his 5 minutes to me, if he wants? Don't mean to put you on the spot, Jake, but just to talk a little bit about the project and the impetus behind it for you.
Yeah, and there's actually two of us. I don't know if Josh is still on here. Josh represents Neighborhood Nonprofit, which has been doing this a lot longer than me and is our partner on this on the nonprofit side. So maybe I'd let Josh go first, and then I'm happy to fill in a couple minutes kind of about our side of the partnership. Josh, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
My camera doesn't seem to want to work, but yeah, this is our first project in Salt Lake. We're just finishing up a project actually in Ogden. We just leased up in Ogden. We have 66 units there from 1 to 3 bedrooms. And we've done, largely more rural projects. We've got projects out in Vernal and Tremont, but this is our first foray really into the Wasatch Front with Ogden and Salt Lake. Yeah, I mean, Jake actually should deserve all the credit for going out and seeking the partnership with VOA. And when we heard about it, we thought it was a great idea. We have, on top of our LIHTC, we have multiple HUD properties that service low-income, disabled, and elderly persons. And we're always trying to find ways to reach out to serve other populations. We just realized we have to do that within a mix. Because we still have to make the projects pencil to some degree, which is why, even in this project, we have some market rate units, even though they're still affordable for being market rate. But no, we're excited with this project. It's been a great partnership for us too to partner up with Jake and his group, and it's just a matter now of making sure lumber doesn't go any more expensive.
Yeah, so we'll take any prayers, finger crossings, whatever you can do to get lumber to go down would be helpful. As far as me personally, I have two partners in Defy Collabs. We're kind of a new group together. I have worked in a few different places, but my passion for some of this work actually came. I used to share a cubicle wall with Tammy and worked in the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department for Salt Lake, and kind of fell in love with. I've always loved development and design, but just fell in love with mission-driven development and trying to find ways to use it to serve the good of the community. So I think the inspiration for the youth aging out of foster care came from one, just proximity, that I knew that facility was there. And it's, for whatever reason, it's been a population I've always felt a connection to. Maybe it's because I wish I was still 18 to 25, but who knows where the connection came from. But I think that proximity made sense, where without a car, they could still be able to participate in the services that the VOA offers, and still get around town. And then I think too, the premise of they're smaller units, and there's a lot of them. And so the premise of, hey, who does that market look like? And that fits the model to be able to give a young person aging out of foster care a place where they can afford that's their own, but they can still be mobile and connected to all the other services and amenities that are offered just by being right there on the track stop. So maybe that's a little bit of it, but yeah, Defy Collabs as a group, we're a younger group, but we have a passion for kind of mission-driven real estate development, and this is our first, hopefully the first of many projects to come, and love this neighborhood. Even we've been looking at a couple other parcels in the neighborhood, and would love to participate on the ballpark, or this piece of ballpark neighborhood, kind of making that transition here on the track stop. So anyhow, yeah.
Great. Thank you, both of you.
I have one more question, Councilman, Chairperson. I
All right,
apologize so much.
Yeah,
real quick.
48. Okay.
I know that you had ADA accessible units also set aside. Are those on the first floor, or at least some of them?
There are some on the first floor. They kind of, efficiency wise, if you stack them, there's basically 3 on each floor. So there's some on each floor, yes. And those follow the same rules as they're marketed first to people with mobility issues, and then they can be marketed elsewhere, but they fall under the same governance of the LORA, requiring it be marketed to them first.
Thank you. I do appreciate having units on the first floor, because people that cannot walk can't get downstairs when the elevator doesn't work in an emergency. So thank you.
And side note, the elevator, one of the reasons we don't have our permit is because we are figuring out how to fit in a generator, so the elevator should always work even in emergencies. But yes.
Very nice. So Jake, I know we don't have time, but just real quick, your other partner mentioned that in Ogden you have done 3-bedroom units, and that's one of the discussions as well that we're about to have about housing for family-sized units. So why this project doesn't have it? It's just a matter of finance. What happened?
Yeah, it's a combination of both. The site is really small, and so because of the constraints of the land, that was one of the reasons we had to be really efficient with the way the units stacked. And then really the amount of units, because we were able to get a larger chunk of market rate units, it's kept us in line on construction costs. Construction costs were already up last year. They're really up this year. And so, I mean, I've heard of other projects that are a couple of $1 million in budget changes since the application in September, and we're staying pretty close. I mean, we have a gap, obviously, which is why we're here. But because of the design, we were able to take more cost than a normal 9% tax credit project would take. I mean, a normal project runs about $10 million in costs. And this one, because of the design and the smaller units, we get 140 units and it's $21 million in cost. So that's part of the reason, but we actually are looking at another one on North Temple, because we agree and we'd love to figure out a way to get some 2 and maybe 3 bedroom units in the next project. This one, I mean, we're really only have like 0.75 acres, so it's a pretty tight site to fit bigger units. But we share the concern. Right now, I'll just say from the standpoint of a developer, it's really, really hard to justify a 3 bedroom because construction costs are so high. When you could fit 2 or 3 studios for the price of 1 3 bedroom, that's kind of the crux. But ultimately, we share the concern. We know there's a greater need, so it's something that we're trying to figure out creative ways to get to. It just didn't fit on this particular site.
All right. Thank you for that information. That gives us information for our next conversation. So, board members, traditionally, what we do with this type not this type of projects, but these items, this would be our briefing, and then we would schedule it for voting at a later time, unless nobody else has any concerns that need to be addressed before we can vote for it. So I will defer to you guys, board members, if you'd like to vote on this resolution today or next time, because there's still lingering questions out there.
Madam Chair, I'm going to vote today. And I think I'm the only one that really raised concerns. So if everyone else is okay, I think that's fine.
All right.
So Madam Chair,
Yep, go ahead.
I move that the board adopt the resolution to approve a loan of $1.34 million to Colony B LLC for an affordable housing project at approximately 228 West, 1300 South.
Second.
All right. Woo. Motion by board member Dugan and seconded by, I'm gonna say Fowler. And I'm gonna roll call this. Rogers.
Yes.
Wharton.
Yes.
Mano.
Yes.
Fowler.
Yes.
Dugan.
Yes.
And I'm a yes. So thank you very much. That passes. Thank you to the applicants. Congratulations. It's going to be awesome. And we're moving on to item number 3. We're a little bit behind in our schedule. So it's not a resolution. So it's not a resolution today. This next item, we will have a discussion about this. So it's for fiscal year 2021-22, affordable housing development funding priorities. We will receive a briefing about these priorities, and at the table we have Allison Rowland and Danny Walls and Tammy Hansaker. Go ahead, Allison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello again. I just want to provide a little bit of context for this fiscal year 2022 affordable housing priorities item. Essentially, the board already took 2 steps toward this new way of doing housing by adopting 2 different policies. One was the Housing Funds Allocation Policy, which you'll probably remember you started talking about back last year, about last fall. And the second was the Housing Development Loan Program Policy, which is distinguishable from the old Housing Trust Fund policy, because as this is shifted into the RDA, the policies have also changed somewhat according to to your preferences. So what you see in your packet is a transmittal from the RDA staff with the draft fiscal year FY 21-22 affordable housing priorities and strategies. And that includes both the proposed resolution and FY 22 housing development budget ideas. The goal today, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, but the goal today is to discuss the priorities that you can find on a list on page 5 of the 12 pages in that packet, in that PDF, and provide policy direction for the RDA staff so that they'll be able to consider the applications that come in for affordable housing projects according to your priorities. In future years, the idea is that this priorities discussion will happen in March, say, much more early than it did this year, so that the board can consider it before the budget discussions begin. So again, in this transmittal, there's both the proposed total funding for all affordable housing projects through the RDA, and there's also the proposed allocation of each amount, or sorry, each share of that total funding among different program categories. These are both those kinds of funding are subject to board approval as part of the RDA's annual budget process. So you'll have an opportunity to discuss these funding amounts in more detail on May 18th. And today the goal really is to discuss the priorities and decide whether you can come to agreement on which priorities you want to change slightly, downplay, upplay, emphasize, whatever you'd like to do on those. And then the date for potential action on these priorities would be May 18th. Thanks.
Board members, we're clear, right, on what we're doing today? Yes? Okay. Great. All right, Danny and Tammy, floor is yours.
Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Allison, for that introduction. I will turn it over to Tammy, but first, as Allison alluded to, our intention is in the future that this will come to you sooner. And the reason that we're saying that is because between the time that the board approved this policy in March, I just want to give credit to Tammy for turning around this entire strategy and funding proposal in just a little over 2 weeks in order to transmit it in time for today's meeting. So that is not ideally what we would like to do, but that was a function of just when the policies were approved. And I'm sure Tammy would love to have more time to dive into it in the future, but wanted to give her credit for that as she's about to present it. So Tammy, you're up.
Thank you. Robert, if I could share my screen, I have a quick presentation to run through. Great. All right, can everyone see this? As Allison mentioned, there's the larger strategy within your packet, but I just wanted to point out some key elements to the strategy. And as Allison also pointed out, this is the result of 2 housing policies that were recently adopted. The RDA Housing Allocation Funds policy was the one that was adopted in, I believe it was February. You approved it essentially last December, and it was formally adopted in February. And that policy creates 4 housing funds under the RDA umbrella. The primary housing fund, which is required tax increment. A lot of our project area have tax increment set-asides that are required to be used for housing. That money goes in there. The secondary housing fund, which is our state statute allows us to allocate additional funds for housing that's dictated by a different section of the code. So the discretionary housing funds go there. The Northwest Quadrant Housing Fund is the monies we're getting from the inland port tax differential. So that goes in that fund. And then the 4th fund we have is the Housing Development Fund. And this is contemplated to be not only funding our future, but any other like non-tax increment revenues that the RDA may receive for affordable housing development. So the allocation funds policy sets up these 4 funds, And then last month, as Allison mentioned, you all adopted the Housing Development Loan Program, which creates that one-stop shop for housing developers to access the funds. And both of these policies contemplate the creation of this annual housing development funding strategy that looks at the RDA's anticipated resources for affordable housing development, not just in these silos of the different funds, but collectively together. Also looking at existing revenues the RDA already has and kind of developing a strategy to deploy those funds for the next fiscal year based on available resources, current community need, current city and RDA policy. For example, the housing plan that the city has, that changes every 5 years. So we can tailor the funding strategy to the current housing plan, and then also current opportunities within the community. So what you have in your packet is the first housing development funding strategy that, as Danny mentioned, was put together rather quickly. So we definitely be open to input if you'd like to see the strategy presented in other ways or include other information. So as part of this strategy, it's more of an administrative document, but the board has two distinct roles with the strategy. It's the adoption of the budget with the revenues and expenses for all of these housing funds, and then the adoption of a resolution that identifies the funding strategies for the next upcoming fiscal year. So this flow chart kind of explains that process. Within the strategy, the proposed fiscal year 22 activities include three main components: the Housing Development Loan Program, a strategic site acquisition fund, and an accessory dwelling unit program. So let's get into the numbers a little bit more. Within the mayor's recommended budget, which I know is still forthcoming, so this is kind of a draft sneak preview, but the RDA's 4 housing funds collectively will have about 4.7 million in revenue in the funds. We're proposing that about 3.5 million of that go to the Housing Development Loan Program, $1 million be set aside for a strategic site acquisition, and 250,000 for an ADU program. Since we don't want to just look at the fiscal year 22 resources in a silo, this second chart, the lower chart, has the prior year budget available, which is about 5.6 million. This is higher than in typical years because our NOFA that was issued last July had a lower response rate. We're fairly certain that was due to uncertainty with what was happening with the development market and COVID at the time. So we have funds left over from this current fiscal year that can be utilized with the fiscal year 22 resources and put out through a new NOFA. So collectively, between what we have available that will revolve in nature and the new FY22 year revenues, we have about 10.4 million to deploy for housing development in fiscal year 22. Oh, and I should mention, going back to the different housing funds, there are fund priorities based on the source of funds. For example, the Inland Port, the Northwest Quadrant housing funds in the policy you adopted, those are prioritized for neighborhoods west of I-15. And the secondary housing fund, which is discretionary tax increment housing funds, those are prioritized for RDA project areas. So there are restrictions on how and where some of the funds can be used, and that's been taken into account in this strategy. So diving into the funding priorities, we left them pretty broad for this upcoming fiscal year. Of course, it's up to your discretion to give us feedback and modify these. And we have taken into account the ongoing conversations that you have been having. So hopefully we're somewhere in the ballpark of what you would like to see. The first funding priority, and I guess I should explain, these funding priorities will be utilized to not only rank and compare applications that we get through NOFAs, through the Housing Development Trust Fund, so to prioritize which applications we give funding, but the funding priorities will be used to provide those interest rate reductions to projects. So they'll be used in two different ways. So the priorities are family housing, and we're kind of qualifying that as 3 to 4 bedroom plus units. Target populations, this is similar to the conversation that we were just having with the Colony B loan. So that would be, we're looking at populations at risk of homelessness, so lower AMIs, youth aging out of foster care, victims of domestic violence, other populations like that. So projects that have 20% or more of the units set aside for these special populations. Neighborhood safety, we are qualifying that as properties or sites that have significant blight or are distressed significantly and kind of a magnet for crime and detracting from the livability of the neighborhood. Number 4, missing middle and unique housing types. So this would be missing middle scale of development. So duplexes, small apartment buildings, fourplexes, just to promote an array of scale of project types within neighborhoods that fit into the neighborhood context. Home ownership is a funding priority as well. Sustainability is a funding priority, so either receiving a certificate through a valid program or net energy ready. Expand opportunity, so provide housing within areas designated as high opportunity. Neighborhood impact, that would be going through the RDA's design review process to ensure that the projects are high quality, enduring, and that fit into the neighborhood context and livability through architectural and urban design best practices. Transportation opportunities, so near a transit stop and providing transportation options such as bike share, car share passes, bike facilities on site. Number 10 is historic preservation and or adaptive reuse. Number 11 is commercial vitality, which kind of speaks to the point that Director Mono brought up, incentivizing the developments that do offer affordable housing, but that also offer that ground floor commercial space. 12 is public art, having a public art component, not publicly owned, but privately owned and publicly visible art. And then fund leveraging to incentivize projects that have a lower share of the overall capital stack that is being funded by the RDA. So those are the funding priorities. Based on what we've been putting into recent projects in terms of funding percentage and whatnot, we came up with some impact targets that we hope to hit. With the 10 million in RDA funding available, we hope to leverage that on a 1:15 ratio and get about 150 million in total capital for affordable housing deployed into the city. We're estimating, based on approximately 40,000 per unit in RDA funding, that would fund about 232 units. We hope that we could hit about half of these, 160 at 50% AMI and below, and 45 in a high opportunity area. We think total, including the market rate units, we'd be at about 350 new units and 10 development projects. Really quick, I know we're probably short on time, but I would like to point out through the Housing Development Loan Program, we're wanting to deploy 5.4 million of that through a competitive citywide NOFA. We want to reserve $1 million for gap financing for projects that, like you just saw, that it's not competitive, but it's available kind of on a first come, first served basis. And 2.7 of the existing funds that are already earmarked for high opportunity by the board in previous years, we would still keep that earmarked for the high opportunity areas. And the strategic site acquisition, we don't have a property in mind, but based on recent conversations and interest by the administration and the board, we're envisioning that these funds could be used to purchase potentially a distressed motel that came up for sale, or properties that are located in a strategic location or that align with RDA priorities and objectives. And then finally, the accessory dwelling unit program. We don't have a lot of details on this program yet. It would be a policy and a program that comes back to the board for a discussion. We are required through our interlocal agreement with the county on the 9-line area to implement an accessory dwelling unit program in the 9-line. So we would, for this year, target the 9-line area with this program. So we anticipate potentially 2 projects could be done, but that is just an estimate at this point in time. We would use the other funding in the balance just to get the program up and running. We envision that it could provide not only financing, but potentially technical assistance. It could potentially include a design competition to come up with some standardized ADU plans for the community. But these are all ideas that are yet to be kind of fleshed out in detail. And we've already talked about this. The board's role is first you adopted the housing policies. Second is adopting the budget with the actual revenues and expenses within the budget. And then the third item is those housing funding priorities that we just ran through. And that is my presentation, Madam Chair.
Thanks, Tammy. Before we move on those numbers that you have, because we haven't seen the budget yet, should we, like, in my mind, the amounts that you kind of allocated to each of the funding sources, they're not yet real because we don't know yet the exact numbers. So I would like people not to think so much about that, but to talk about the priorities. And then next time when we talk about the budget, then we have real numbers, and then we can, compare to our priorities that we will discuss today and see if those match. Right? Am I understanding this correctly? I think this is Tammy. Okay, going like this. All right. So discussion about those 12 or 13 items, priorities. So who's had Rogers, and then Wharton, and then Mano, I think you had. I don't know if I saw you. Okay. Wharton and sorry, Rogers and Wharton.
Okay. For me, the blighted properties need to be bumped to one of the top priorities, specifically because we have so many blighted properties in the areas that we're looking at. So that was the top priority for me, to say that we identify that as a much higher priority in that list. Also, board members, I would appreciate it if we would remove the Northwest Quadrant money from this. I've been working with staff and with RDA board members, not board members, but RDA staff, to discuss a community land trust specifically tied to the west side and for home ownership as well as for affordable units. So there's much more to be discussed. I do not want to allocate this money. I've been involved with this from the start. We need to finish this through and getting the community land trust going so that we can use it specifically for the west side impacts that the inland port is going to give the residents. So those are my 2 starting statements, and I'd open that for discussion. But I've been meeting with several different nonprofits, also with the city staff, in order to discuss the community land trust and making that a viable option, because I don't want to reinvent the wheel every single year talking about this. I want to establish the community land trust so it is running on its own and it's feeding itself and growing it larger and larger on its own without having to fund it. So I know that money is going to be directly tied every single year, but this is something that could absolutely be a game changer for affordable housing on the west side, as well as economic development. There's so many things that we can do with it, but we are just barely touching the bottom of the iceberg in order to get to that point.
Thanks, James. Chris, do you have an answer for that, or should we address some of? Okay. So James, help me understand, because I was going to bring that up because it does say home ownership, and I was thinking, no, the Northwest Quadrant funds should be used for affordable home ownership in the West Side. For this purpose and for your purpose of community land trust, the community land trust is not housed within the RDA, or is it? Because no. Okay. So how does this work?
That's a great question, Madam Chair, and that's something that we can discuss. But there are community land trusts in other areas that have been doing successful development. Whether it's tied to RDA or not is something that I think that staff can actually identify a lot better than I can. Specifically our city council staff, just because they've been involved with me in these discussions from day one.
All right, can somebody help us out with
there are just models, there are models in different areas that haven't necessarily been explored, just with bandwidth and everything. So there is a community land trust line item that is located in hand. That does not preclude the RDA from participating in something like a community land trust with citywide housing or Northwest Quadrant housing funds, because as long as they operate within the requirements, the legal requirements of those, that would satisfy that requirement. We've never done it before, but it doesn't preclude it.
All right. So James, what you're saying is, so for direction for our staff is to say, and for our discussion, let's not talk about this affordable home ownership at this point. Let's talk about the other priorities.
Okay, the RDA staff has done a magnificent job in regards to identifying our silos, right? Okay. And I don't feel comfortable at this point saying this is where this money is going to go until I explore every single option in regards to the community land trust, because we've never done it. And having this much money coming in, 10% of that coming into this and throwing it at the community land trust, I just don't want to throw it at projects. I want to create an environment where we are funding this and creating affordable, and we're doing affordable rentals as well as market to help supplement the affordability component of it. There's just so many options that we can do, and I want to sit down with RDA staff and with city staff and make sure that we are 100% on board with the community land trust and looking how projecting forward how this can fund itself.
All right. Do any other board member has any comment on that? Go ahead, Chris.
Mine's more on the acquisition question, that that why do we have a certain amount set aside for acquisition that we haven't had in previous years, and some of the properties that I'm thinking of are gonna, 1 million is not sufficient for that. So I'm just a little bit concerned about why that's separated out this year, and what is being contemplated for that 1 million, which properties. It's not, I don't think it's the ones I'm thinking of.
There are no,
oh, go ahead, Tammy.
Go ahead,
there are
Tammy.
no specific properties that have been identified. I think there have been discussions happening on various properties, but nothing has been solidified by any means. So we just put that line item within the budget because throughout the year, it seems like we do, when there is an opportunity to purchase a property, there's a discussion like, where are we going to get the resources? So we do know that $1 million likely would not be enough to purchase a strategic property, but it would be available to kind of assemble other resources potentially and get a property purchased.
So I have a question on that, Tammy. So let's say next time we meet, you have the actual numbers of our revenue, and you're like, oh, never mind, we have more, so maybe we do allocate more for the property acquisition. Is that a possibility?
I believe the revenue numbers are what are being presented within the mayor's budget, but like you pointed out, that has not happened yet, so consider these draft numbers.
Okay.
But I think we're at where we're pretty much at for this fiscal year budget.
All right.
Madam Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
I'm wondering, you might just keep going in circles on this, because having this discussion absent having the budget in your hands yet doesn't make a lot of sense. As long as numbers are attached to it, I could see having a discussion about the priorities and things, but I think you're getting wound up into the budget piece of it when you don't have access to that information yet. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is, as the staff was defining the role of the board, that is absolutely the role of the board. That's great. And and that is the path that you're on. If you wanted to be on a different path, that's okay too. So they're following up on the things that you've told them so far. So the interest that the board has expressed, the approaches, that sort of thing, they're bringing that to you in a package. But now once you see that, if you say, oh, we want it to be a little bit different, or we want it to be a lot different, that's still okay. You know, you can still give more feedback to the RDA staff or to us or whomever to tweak this or change it significantly. They're just trying to react to what you've said so far. So, for example, Councilmember Rogers on the motel piece or the blighted property piece, if that's a significant priority, then you can do a straw poll today and make that clear. If it's that you're not ready to commit in any way, shape, or form on the inland port 10%, then you can do a straw poll on that. So I think, is there some funding that's being anticipated to be spent out of the Northwest Quadrant inland port money? Because I think that's what some council members are reacting to.
That's the 200. Sorry, go ahead, Tammy.
Yes, in the mayor's budget that will be presented, I believe it has the 250,000 in revenues coming from the inland port allocated as the ADU program expense.
Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead. Board Member Fowler, and then my.
So Tammy, as you mentioned in the presentation and in this and what was in the staff report, per our interlocal agreement with the county as it relates to the 9 line, and correct me if I'm wrong, we have to implement some sort of ADU program. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, but we don't have to get that money from inland port.
Correct.
So we can get that money from any of the other 3 silos that we have.
Correct. Yes,
Okay.
we were unaware of the community land trust discussions. So we were thinking we have heard that there's a priority for inland port monies to be used to help homeownership, and an ADU program does help with homeownership. Maybe not direct homeownership to encourage new homeowners, but homeownership and diversifying incomes for homeowners, providing, another type of housing within neighborhoods. multi-generational housing opportunities, that sort of thing.
And to be clear, I think that you very much took exactly what we have talked about in the past and tried to implement that. And I want to appreciate you for that and the RDA staff for that, because we have emphasized that that 10% needs to be spent on the west side. And there has been talk about how important home ownership is on the west side. So I appreciate you creatively thinking about that and implementing what we have talked about. I also very much appreciate James coming up with this this other idea that I think is worth exploring for me at this time. Of we've seen that the Community Land Trust has been funded. It hasn't utilized the money that has been in those funds for, I would say, at least a couple of years at this point. And then we sort of lose focus on it. And so I think it's an interesting way to look at how do we continue ensuring that there is some, I want to say legacy. It's the only thing I can think of with this Community Land Trust, right? That there is a legacy to it. And there's a reason that the Inland Port, I mean, there's a lot of reasons people think it exists, but the things that we were able to negotiate out of it have a purpose and a place to go without necessarily needing to come back and renegotiate that. So first off, thank you for taking what we've said and putting it into this plan and reading our minds and saying, wait a minute, you said all this. Thank you for kind of come up with other ideas and say, wait, there's this other thing. And I appreciate this other avenue to explore a little bit. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there. Don't want you to think we're not appreciative of everything that you really have taken our goals and put them on paper. Just sometimes those goals change at this.
All right.
So
Thanks, Amy. Dan?
I want to go back to the priorities, because I think the Community Land Trust, I got to get educated on that, because I think what James is talking about is something important, but it's probably further than this quick discussion here or this discussion here. And on the priorities and the incentives to the using the funding and getting the reduction in interest rates, it seems like there's a lot of priorities and almost everything could fit in all those priorities. So everyone's going to get something. And I kind of look at them and go, as I look through the list, I first said, hey, the top 6 are, I think clearly should have a higher incentive. But then I look at number 6 and saying, everything should be sustainable already. Our building codes should say they're sustainable. And that should be a bottom line, no matter what you're doing in building these days, it has to be sustainable. So there shouldn't be an incentive to that. It should be just a flat out given. For any loan, you have to have it sustainable. But I look at the top 5 and I go, those are key elements that we've been talking about. Family housing, target population. We just talked about the aging out of foster care, the missing middle, the safety, like we talked about with James was talking about the blighted side of the house. Those and homeownership, those are the big issues, and we really need to incentivize those. The others are nice to have, but I'm not sure if the incentive needs to be the same as the top 5. And that I just saw that as my first run at the incentive side. There's a requirement side, and then there's the, hey, it's a nice to have if it's a tiebreaker. And number 6, the sustainability, got to have it right away. No questions asked. That's just a ticket to the party.
Madam Chair, if I may clarify, the RDA is currently working on a sustainability policy, and the mayor's direction to RDA staff has been to implement stricter sustainability requirements by 2023. So we are thinking of the next couple of years as kind of a transition without a hard and fast requirement, but still incentivizing sustainability aspects of projects while working with the development community and doing outreach. So developers and community partners know what's coming in 2023.
Okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
Chris, you're unmuted, so I'm not sure if you're ready. You wanted to say something else. Okay. So I do like what Dan Dugan just said. I think I'm inclined to, to put priorities on these first 5 that you have on the list, but maybe bring the commercial vitality to, I don't know how to move it to this side instead, but not being its own item. I think because of the project that we just saw that doesn't have that portion on the bottom floor in an area that needs it, it's something that I think it's important we should have, because, for example, in the North Temple area that we have, there's a lot of opportunities missed for businesses where they don't have spaces right now, and there's a lot of housing being built, but not enough commercial spots to serve the community that lives there already and that will be living there. So I would like to move that over on that side. But moving forward, let's say hypothetically we had agreed on that. How do you guys propose when a project comes over? Are you going to say your project needs to meet these 5 priorities in order for us to even look at your project, at your proposal? Or are you going to divide it up into, we'll do 10 projects, 2 family housing, 2 target populations? I'm not understanding, because we have a lot of priorities. So how are you guys going to manage that? And choose that are
In the last couple of NOFAs that were issued, we had about the same number of funding priorities, and we would rank the projects against one another, rank each of the priorities, and actually put together a matrix that is then forwarded to the review committee and also the board, so you can see exactly which projects met which funding priority and each of the project scores. So it's kind of to see which projects score better against one another, but you can weight some of them higher than others.
Okay. And board members, is that something that we would like to get into? Because once it goes back to, okay, so what's our number 1 priority out of this list, and are we going to give those the most points and the most rank, so they can rank higher? Go ahead, Chris.
I mean, this is just a hard discussion to have without the budget numbers, and for me, the priorities might change depending on where the location of the project is and where other things are panning out. So like what I might rank as number 1 today might not be number 1 in 6 months. So I just don't know how. I mean, and I don't recall that we've done this exercise in previous years either.
We haven't. This is the new kind of strategy that was set up through the newly adopted housing policies, the Housing Fund Allocation Policy and the Housing Development Loan Program Policy. And it was intended to provide a discussion on an annual basis. So you're not setting priorities in the policy, because the policy could live for 10 years. And your funding priorities can change over time based on the resources available and the community need. So it was meant to be an opportunity for you to fine tune those policies on an annual basis. And we can definitely change it in years moving forward. Our thought process was that you are very busy after the budget is announced. So give you an opportunity prior to you getting the budget to start talking about these funding priorities, recognizing that you probably would not adopt them until after you've seen and kind of adopted the budget. But we can definitely transmit this information at a later date in future years if it's confusing to begin the discussion before the budget discussion.
But I think, if I may, Madam Chair,
Yeah,
to
go ahead.
clarify, we just passed these policies in January and February. And so I think this was, as mentioned earlier, a preemptive way to say we're trying to follow the policy before the budget. And I think the idea and why we talked about this last year with the policy is that our priorities may change year to year. And we wanted to create that space for flexibility. And that ideally this would come to us in maybe January, February, March, so that we could have these discussions without the numbers, just the policy part of it. So then then the RDA can they can create their budget based on what the council's main priorities have been. I think that was the intent and the idea behind that policy. But because we just passed the policy 3 months ago and they have to transmit things to us almost 3 weeks beforehand, I think we're kind of snowballing all of the discussions really quickly right now. But I agree, Chris. I think this is a good exercise in what we need to learn for next year's budget and how this policy we just adopted will work in the future.
Great. Go ahead, Danny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just like to agree and add on to what both Director Wharton and Fowler just said. As far as the timing, I know we're kind of hung up on the numbers and where we want that to go, but one of the pieces that we would include in this moving forward in the future is a report on where the money has gone, what the projects are that you as a board have approved, and what that's resulted in terms of units and hitting those goals and priorities. And the idea there is just to kind of show what you've gotten for your dollars, what we're seeing in the market, and then also, as Director Fowler said, have that flexibility to say, okay, well, this or that maybe didn't hit the mark as much, or this is now what we really want to focus on this year. And then you can adjust and have those high-level policy discussions earlier in the year so that we then can use that to inform as we go into the budget, working on that. And then as part of the budget, you as the board would be able to have the specific direction and questions that I think Director Wharton is getting at. That is when you then can decide how much money goes to what types of programs to accomplish the priorities that you've said are important to us going into the next year. So.
Great, thank you.
And could I follow up with Danny on one part of that, just to clarify? Danny, do you see, does it work for you that say something comes up and it hasn't been contemplated by the board or the staff, it's new to the city, a problem, say some problem property or some problem situation that really couldn't be foreseen? It's okay for the board to change their policies or suspend their policies in a rare circumstance, is it not?
Yeah, I think Cindy.
You can do that.
Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt if you haven't finished. Go ahead.
I'm just rambling. Go ahead.
No, I think Cindy, you're absolutely right, and I think that's where, as part of the policy, that's why we've tried to set aside funds for acquisition, because we know as opportunities come up that we know that board members have been interested in potentially pursuing. It would be nice to have funds available for that. I think that's also the purpose behind that set aside of emergency requests. So if something comes in that either didn't fit within the NOFA as it was issued, or a project came in like what we just saw with Colony B, where construction costs came in or their tax credit levels changed, that we then have that ability to adjust for that. And then specifically to your question, you're absolutely right. The board at any time has the opportunity to change direction with their policy, amend the budget allocations, or determine that there's a different priority or opportunity or problem to solve that they then want to say, hey, can we pull some of this money and now do X, Y, and Z?
Yeah, so
I mean, that's all within your normal budget amendment process now.
Yeah. And they could also do it sort of in the reverse to say, we're going to allocate 0 of the money for Northwest Quadrant right now, but we're going to allocate 80% or 50% of the other monies right now. They still have all of that flexibility. You're just trying to give them a structure that advances what they've been requesting. Is that right? So they still have their flexibility. You're trying to define a path, but it doesn't technically remove their flexibility. Is that correct?
That is correct. We're trying to be exactly responsive to what you're saying is the interest in maybe taking a look at those priorities more frequently, having the reporting mechanisms of what we have been doing and what the projects have been accomplishing, and then doing all that in a way that informs not just us as we prepare the budget, but then ultimately the board approves where those specific allocations go. So to your point, it's absolutely within, the board's power and what they've, done at times in the past of saying, we do want this money set aside for Northwest Quadrant, and either here's our legislative intent or here's the charge to staff to come back and propose something that hits these marks for spending those funds. And so we are trying to build all of that into the process.
Yeah. So ultimately, council, if you felt like, oh, you're not ready, or you wanted to do it in a slightly tweaked way or something, you just could go ahead and adopt only a portion of those funds, appropriate only a portion of those funds. So you have entire flexibility on your direction.
Right. Good to know. Go ahead, Board Member Mano. We are, 1 second, but before that, we are at 3:41. I think we probably want to have Darren say what he needs to say. We've had a little discussion, probably move on
Okay.
to the next items. Thanks.
I just wanted to clarify a couple of things to make sure I'm understanding the discussion right. So one, we talked a lot about the priorities. To my knowledge, the priorities were never like in order of importance. They were just all individually important priorities. So it sounds like the discussion is maybe we would consider ordering them as some are more important than others and some may be actually absolutely necessary for every project. But that would be new, right? That's not something we've ever done to my understanding. And then the second thing was with what Board Member Rogers was saying, or Board Member Rogers about the Northwest Quadrant. That money is contemplated to be used for ADUs. And Board Member Rogers, you're saying that you do not want that used for ADUs. You want it to be used for the community land trust. Is that am I understanding that right? Okay, thanks. I just wanted to make sure I'm understanding. That's all. Thank you.
Yes, you're correct. So if we're not ready to give staff direction on these priorities, we can think about this and talk about them and bring, come prepared with, I don't know, for your top 5 or whatever to discuss next time. And that way we can see the budget and see how that changes our thought process in what priorities are what. Is that?
And Madam Chair, if I could just share, I think that would actually align with the more standard way that we do the budget is for the council to just look at the budget and change the numbers based on what you're interested in funding before you adopt it.
Right. So today, obviously, we had a little bit of a discussion. I know where Dan is. I know where James is on two of the priorities here. I know where I'm at as well with these 13 items. And next time, unless Darren, Chris, and Amy would like to express where their heart is with the 13 priorities today, we can, if you're not ready, we can skip it to next time. And we'll talk again. And go ahead, Darren. I don't see Amy.
I think I'm generally still in agreement with all of the priorities.
Okay.
And I think some kind of prioritization or saying that we have to have like these certain ones have to be met by at least 50% of our projects or some way of ensuring that a few of them are met. Because my concern is similar to Board Member Dugan's concern is that they're broad enough to the point that any project could say, well, I hit 5 and 12, because mostly every project that would come to us would hit at least a few of them. So making sure that there's not just one or two that are super easy to hit and the rest of them are really hard. So the developers just say, well, I choose not to do that one. And then we actually never meet that priority. That's my concern. So whether that's through a like, here's our rank or here's the 3 that every project has to have, I think just making sure that the priorities can all be met. So I don't necessarily have any that I want to remove or anything like that, but I just think there's some that are harder to get than others that we might not get unless we have a way of prioritizing it.
Okay. Good point. Let me see if Amy has her hand. Let's see me. So anyway, so if nobody else has anything else, then we'll stop this conversation here. We'll continue it on May 18th. But we're going to move on with our agenda, and we're moving to item number 4, which is report and announcements from the executive director. Let's see, mayor here. I don't see her, but
I don't see the mayor on.
Okay. Then we'll skip that portion. We're going to go to item number 5, report and announcements from RDA staff.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just 2 quick announcements because I know we're running over time. First of all, I'd like to announce the promotion of Kara Lindsley, a project manager with the agency. She's been promoted to the senior project manager role. Kara's been with the agency, I think, just over 6.5 years, and she is currently in the program at the U for the Masters of Public Policy. So we are pleased to announce that promotion. And then second, I'd like to thank you, Madam Chair, and Director Fowler, as well as the Mayor, for attending the opening of SpyHop. And thank you to the board for all of the support of the project over the years. For those who may not have read about it or understand, SpyHop is the Youth Media Arts Center within the Central 9th neighborhood. They completed their 22,000 square foot headquarters, which includes the offices and programming, classroom space, production facilities, as well as performance and community space. This has been a project for the RDA for quite a while. We participated by selling the property to SpyHop and also providing financing for the project. It has worked through the RDA all the way from the beginning of acquisition of the site to environmental cleanup, disposition, fundraising, and financing throughout that entire process. There have been a few RDA staff members who have been involved in this from the beginning, as far as laying out the plan for Central 9th and then acquiring the sites. But our deputy, Tammy Hunsaker, was the project manager for the project as it got over the final big steps in terms of the cleanup and then disposition of the property and everything. So thank you all for attending that and the support. That's a really cool project that I just wanted to make sure we gave a little bit more time to, and thanked everyone on our end who was involved in it. So unfortunately, Tammy wasn't able to attend the ceremony. So part of this was to make sure that she got some props here in the public meeting.
Absolutely. It's amazing. Thank you so much. It's been a long time coming, but really, you guys have worked so hard on it. So, and previous board members for working through the financing and approving such an awesome project. So thank you guys. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Danny, and the rest of the staff.
Thank you.
It's that, one of the puzzle pieces that finally it's there in that neighborhood. So I'm super excited to see that alive.
Thank you. That is all we have. So thank you, Madam Chair and the board.
All right. So, we have a written briefing. Hopefully you guys saw it. And then we are number E. And then we don't have any items for number E. So do we have a closed session? I'm not aware of, but do we? Nope. Okay. Then it's 3:48. We're going to adjourn this meeting. And so I forgot, do we need to roll call this? Do we need to have a motion for adjourn? No, right? Okay. So Madam Chair of the Council, what time would you like us back?
I know we are running late, but luckily the first 3 items on our agenda shouldn't take too long. So I would like a quick 5 to 7 minute break. So
all right.
Is that all right with everybody?
3:55.
And Jennifer Bruno, is that okay? I mean, like, as far as when we start meetings and things like that? Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See ya.